A lot of times, different studios will put out movies around the same time that are very similar in plot to the point where you could easily confuse one for the other. And sometimes there are movies where at first you don't realize if it's the same plot. It's a different movie that did it earlier. So today we're going to take a look at some examples of twin movies. This isn't to compare or say which is better, but just simply to acknowledge their similarities and how closely to each other they were released. Now, probably one of the most infamous examples, if not the most infamous example on this list, is Ants. Now, honestly, this kind of makes me angry because this movie was released just purely out of spite. Ants was released on October 2nd, 1998, and Bug's Life was released on November 25th, 1998, which just happened to be the day I turned 1 year old. The whole reason Ants even exists is, like I said, just out of spite. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who started DreamWorks, worked for Disney in the 90s, and he left around that time after having a falling out with Disney, which kind of makes it a little awkward when you see old trailers for movies like Lion King and Aladdin, where he's sort of being their hype man, since he left very shortly. And when he left, Pixar had massive success with Toy Story, and he left Disney about a year before Toy Story was released. And so, since it takes a few years to make animated films, he had a bit of knowledge about some of the upcoming films from Disney, and so he knew that they were making a movie about ants. He didn't know what the exact plot was, he just knew this concept was about ants. And so it sort of became this Willy Wonka spies in the factory situation where he basically stole their recipe, but changed it just enough to avoid the lawyers. And then he released it just 8 weeks before Bug's Life to make it seem like he did it first. So Bug's Life came out and everyone was like, didn't we already see this movie? Even though Bug's Life was in development far, far longer than Ants was. So yeah, this movie exists purely out of spite. Another example you can take with the DreamWorks Disney ripoffs is Road to Eldorado and Emperor's New Groove. Now this one you're probably thinking, these are nothing alike. What do you mean? Well, when Emperor's New Groove was in very early development, around the time that Katzenberg was still working for Disney, Disney was working on this huge animated musical set in Mesoamerica called Kingdom of the Sun. And the plot of that movie was basically the character who eventually became Cusco meets a llama herder. That character obviously later became Pacha in the final cut, and he realized they look exactly alike, so they switch places, and it's basically the Prince and the Pauper. But there was also a subplot about the character who was the villain of the picture who eventually became Yzma, thinking that the sun gives her wrinkles, so she plans to unleash the god of the underworld to block out the sun forever. There was even a villain song about it, and in fact, most of the soundtrack for Emperor's New Groove, with the exception of like 1 or 2 songs, is all these unused songs that they recorded for this movie that was never made. So that's really interesting. So Katzenberg took their Kingdom of the Sun idea and made Road to Eldorado. So yeah, even though these movies in terms of plot now are nothing alike other than being set in Mesoamerica and having buddy comedy elements, it was basically the early version of Emperor's New Groove that he tried to rip off. Which is also interesting because the third act of Road to Eldorado is them fighting some sort of underworld god, just like how that was supposed to be the third act of Kingdom of the Sun. And even though it's not a musical in the traditional sense, it has songs that kind of help move the story along, kind of like Tarzan, which was also kind of the idea that they were doing with Kingdom of the Sun. Moving on to the 2010s, we actually have 3 movies that came out around the same time about the bad guy deciding to be the good guy. Despicable Me and Megamind, which came out just 4 months apart from each other, and then Wreck-It Ralph, which came out about 2 years later. Now, again, the actual plot lines of these movies, vastly different from each other. But the main idea is the main character starts out as a villain, but then through the course of the film decides to redeem himself. Just kind of weird that the whole theme of, I don't want to be the bad guy anymore, was in all these movies that came out just a couple years apart from each other. There was like, this is weird. Madagascar and the Wild. This time, it's Disney doing the ripoff, as they made a movie about 1 year after Madagascar that involves animals in the New York Central Park Zoo who escape and go on this journey to the wild. Now, the movie The Wild has more in common with Finding Nemo in terms of plot than it does Madagascar, but considering that this is a movie about New York Zoo animals, and the fact that the animation is also super, super cheap by Disney standards, it makes you wonder, how much were they ripping off before they decided to just kind of rush this movie out? Dragonheart and Shark Tale. Now, when you say Shark Tale and rip off in the same sentence, most people are going to assume that you're talking about Finding Nemo. But honestly, other than the fact that the main characters of both films are fish, they're nothing alike in terms of plot. You know what Shark Tale does rip off in terms of plot? Dragonheart. Dragonheart is about a knight who spares a dragon's life, and then the two team up, and the knight basically keeps pretending to slay the dragon as a protection racket. Shark Tale is about a fish who spares a shark's life, and then pretends to slay sharks as a protection racket. Dragonheart came out in 1996, and Shark Tale came out in 2004, so there's a bigger gap than some of these other ones that came out 1 or 2 years apart, but it's still interesting how similar in terms of plot they are. Batman vs. Superman and Captain America Civil War. 2 comic book movies, both about a billionaire fighting against a guy who wears red, white, and blue. In fact, they were so similar that at one point they were supposed to come out the exact same day. They were both supposed to come out May 6, 2016, until Warner Brothers was like, wait a second here. And they ended up moving Batman vs. Superman up to late March. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Happy Feet. Now, this one I don't know if it counts that much, because these movies came out over 40 years apart from each other, but you can't deny they have the exact same plot. The main character is born with some sort of oddity, they become an outcast of their tribe, they go on a journey with a group of other misfits, and then they return home and save their town from catastrophe. Very, very similar plots. Smallfoot, Missy Link, and Abominable. Now, I haven't seen any of these movies, so I don't know plot-wise how similar they are, but the fact that 2 of these were released the same year, and there was only a 2-year gap between the other one, makes you wonder. These movies about, the Abominable Snowman and or the Missing Link and or Bigfoot, and they come out so close to each other, I kept expecting Pixar to announce a Monsters, Inc. spin-off movie about the Abominable Snowman just to keep up with the trend. But I guess we kind of have that now because of what they did in Monsters at Work, so we kind of got that. I know I already mentioned Bug's Life, but there's also another movie that ripped off. Bug's Life, Galaxy Quest, and the Three Amigos. They have the same plot. Actors or circus or whatever are mistaken to be the real heroes. They go to save the town after they're mistaken for the real heroes from the guy who's, running the town and keeping everybody oppressed. To the point where, even the one in Galaxy Quest kind of looks like Hopper. So you can't deny, they're all the same exact story. And finally, we have Sky High and Zoom, released just 1 year apart, both about a school for superheroes, which is also kind of X-Men. I get that. I get the School for Superheroes thing was X-Men, which came out before either of these movies. But the fact that Sky High and Zoom are both about these superhero kids, and they came out a year apart, they were released so closely to each other, makes you wonder. So what are some other twin movies or rip-off movies that you notice came out around the same time, and you're like, did we already see this? Was there a movie very similar to this? So let me know ones that I missed or ones I didn't think of, and I will see you next time.